Now let's take a look at modifying this saw blade from this cutting motion to a slicing motion. So let's go out to our class files, and in there's a folder called Slider Crank Cutting. Let's double click on that and open the assembly Slider Crank Cutting assembly. And I'll start by deleting this rail and the saw blade, and I'd like to open this part right here. Just want to focus on that part. I don't want to see this other geometry, so I can turn off the base, PMI dimensions, and the sketches. And I don't want to see this other geometry, so I'll go to View and turn off where it says Show. And now I'm just looking at that part. Now, before I create the blade, I'd like to grab this face right here and just push it right through the model, so it's opened all the way through. And I'll go back here to Rectangle by Center, and on this face right in here, I'll lock to that face. Go to Sketch View. I'd like to create a rectangle right here at that base, 30, tab 35, and accept, and fit the view. And I'll go to the Line Commander, create a blade, and just a little bit above the plus sign. And I'd like to keep that centered. And I'll make that equal. And then I'd like to go to Extrude. And I'll use the option here, Chain. And I'll identify that, but it's not identifying it all, so I need to trim this out first. Trim that line. Now when I go Extrude, Chain, I'll identify that geometry. Right mouse click, and then I'd like to extrude. I only want it to go one way. Extrude right to the face right there. And there's our blade. But I'd also like to go to the round command and pull down on that, and there's a chamfer equal setbacks. Click on that. And I'll click on these two faces here. And for the setback, I'll type in 1.4 millimeters. Hit enter. So there's the blade. I'll close and return, and I'll fit the view. And now I'd like to create guide rails for this blade. So I'll go to Create in Place to create a new part. I'm going to use the Bigraphic Input option. Click OK. And I'll lock the XYZ axis right on that corner there, green check mark. And I'll call this part Rails. And I have all my geometry turned off, so I'll go back to View, Show, and I'd like to just see this part right here, so I could turn these other parts off. Turn off the base, crank, and the coupler, and leave the slider on. So I'd like to borrow some geometry. Go to the Borrow command, and on this face right here, on this plane, identify that plane, look at the sketch view, and I'll borrow these two ends right here. I'll draw a line down the center. I'll use that as a reference, and I could change that to construction. And then right at the center, I'll just create a rectangle. I'll make that rectangle 40, tab 12, and accept. And I'll borrow some more geometry here. And I'd like to cut this area out in here, so I'll just draw a couple of lines about here, close to these ends. And again, these are the areas I'd like to cut away. And I'll go up here to Trim, and I'll trim this front piece away, these lines here, and now I'm ready to extrude that piece. And so we'll go Select, Extrude. Let's push that back, say 110. And I'll close and return. Fit the view. Turn on my other parts.